problem. Government is the problem.
We can meet our destiny to build a land here that will be for all mankind a shining city on a hill.
You're listening to the Liberty Brothers Radio Show, only on Revolution Radio. Now, here are your hosts, Jim White and Jason Van Tatenhove.
Crusade for freedom is your chance and mine to fight communism.
Please hang up and try again.
This is Gavin.
Gavin, hi, you're live on the Liberty Brothers Radio Show. Thanks for joining us today. We actually just got done playing the audio side of your famous viral video with the citizen pulls over the cop, gives warning.
Right on. Good to be here, guys. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Gavin, let me give you it's at Seim, right? Gavin Sim?
Seim. Yeah, it's
Seim.
kind of pronounced in reverse, but close
Seim.
enough.
Okay, let me give you a proper introduction. Gavin Sim is a dynamic, no-nonsense Liberty speaker from Washington who ran for Congress in 2014 and turned his district upside down. He takes government lawlessness head-on and educates people on the Constitution and what makes liberty tick, while discussing solutions and conversations we can use to take back America. Gavin's stands have proven effective time and time again. He headed up the largest felony civil disobedience rally in American history, which resulted in the nullifying of I-594 gun restrictions, and he has headed up many other conversations to force government into compliance.
Well, that makes me sound official.
Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon on the Liberty Brothers Radio Show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, Gavin, first off, I gotta ask you, because we're always trying to encourage our listeners to get active, get involved, to just get out there and do something. And you've really done that. You've really gotten out there, and I gotta say, I think you got lucky with this cop that you actually were able to pull one over that didn't just, get out, taser you, and start beating on you, but actually listened and seemed to have an open mind about things.
I think it's not luck. I think we have a misperception of how we deal with government. And I always say, as a man of faith, as a Christian, I say I'll start every battle on my knees, but I'll end standing boldly on my feet before government. Everybody doesn't approach it from that angle, but what we all can approach it from is we can all stand up to government. And people will say, well, the officer was being nice. The officer, and to be fair, the officer was reasonable. I'm not trying to knock on the officer, other than the fact that he was breaking the law and continued to do so for weeks after, until they got the cars marked. But what I'm getting at in relation to your statement is that I actually stopped another officer and did the same thing about 3 days later and had basically the same result, but a little quicker of an interaction. And I demanded he give me ID. And that time I actually took the ID from him and sat there and lectured him about the law. And I think the key thing, and there's a video of that as well.
That's so awesome. The
key thing to me, and maybe that's too early to get started on this, but the key thing is we have to stand up and we have to go on the offensive, and we'll come to that later in the show. I don't know how long we're going to be here, but we can come back to that.
We've got about 50 minutes, and I didn't get a chance to actually finish my question. I wanted to ask, what in your life brought you to this point that you wanted to get so active and get out there and really start educating people in kind of a guerrilla tactic sort of way?
I am a bit of an unexpected activist. I was homeschooled. I grew up kind of in rural Farmville. And so I on the upside didn't get brainwashed by the government system. And on the other side, I was engaged in politics. I cared about liberty and principle, but I wasn't super well studied on it necessarily. What happened for me is, as I started my own business, I got married, I had kids. So I have a wife, I have 4 kids now. We just had a 4th. But in my business, I'm not involved in politics in the day job. I am a portraitist and a pictorialist. I make wall portraits of families to put on walls. I teach photography. I make educational videos in the photography industry. So that's my background. And in with that, I travel around quite a bit, and we take these road trips where we load up the family in the super camper and take off and hit the road for 2, 3, 4 months at a time. And really what pushed me over the edge is in being out in America. When you're on a road trip, you kind of have that American dream kind of mindset. It's the highways and byways and the liberty and the amber waves and all that kind of stuff. And then I got out there, and I would come like one of the turning points to me was one of these checkpoints on the road in Texas for inland, not at the border, but inland checkpoints with the federal government. And I started doing research, and I started saying, hey, something's wrong here. We have a constitution. This isn't Nazi Germany. I should be able to travel freely on my roads with my family. And so the turning point for me was one day I just said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I came to one of those checkpoints, and the guy started asking me questions. And he said, well, where are you coming from? And I looked him in the eye, and I said, that's none of your business. And he said, well, we'll pull over to secondary. And I said, no. And we went around, and he got his supervisors and things like that. And they said, you have to pull over to secondary. I said, unless I'm suspected of committing a crime that you can articulate, I don't have to do anything. And I put the truck in park in the middle of the highway, and I stopped, and I refused to move. And I blocked the state highway for 15 minutes and made them route traffic around me until they finally called in the big guns and came and chatted with me a little bit, and I went on my way. And I was absolutely terrified. But that was a turning point to me, because I realized that was the day I made the decision that I am willing to die standing up for the liberty of my children, if that's what it takes, because I am not going to continue to let us slip into despotism and tyranny and lawlessness if I can help it. And what I didn't realize then is how much difference one of us can make if we stand up. And so that was kind of the tipping point for me. And then a year or so later, while sitting at a friend's house, interestingly in Texas as well, I said, I've had enough. I'm going to run for Congress. And so last year I ran for United States Congress here in Washington, and I lost, which isn't that big of a surprise, being a 29-year-old unknown. But what I did do is pressured the 20-year incumbent into retirement, who had a terrible constitutional voting record, helped to open up that race and bring the whole conversation constitutional. And when that ended, it just kept moving. I actually thought I would get a break when the campaign was over, and it turns out that there's still tyranny everywhere. So here we are.
Talk a little bit, Gavin, if you don't mind. We reported, I think, Monday, and you probably saw the story as well. And I forget what, I think it's out east. They're trying to ban sledding. I mean, what in the world, man? When are these people going to stop realizing that they do not know best for us? I mean, it's almost like some control grid they want to put over everybody. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
They're not going to stop until we stop them. We just saw a Congress of legislative eunuchs vote a criminal as the Speaker of the House once again. We just saw a new swarm of Republicans, and everything's going to be better now, do more of the same. And this is a lot of what I campaigned about, but it's a lot of just what I talk about in bringing everything under that umbrella of liberty. We continue to vote for people that tickle our ears and scratch our backs and say, I'm going to fight for you. And they continually go there, and they will not stand up because they are cowards and they are eunuchs who refuse to stand up for liberty. And so it falls to us, because we're making a mistake in America. And we've made a great mistake in thinking that it's our politicians' job to fix things. The problem with America is not Obama, it's not Congress, and it's not your state legislatures. The problem with America is you. Because if you won't stand up, then nothing will change. I'm not excusing our Congress. I mean, I'll rake them over the coals. I know that process. I've been involved in an election. I can hold them accountable right down to the letter of the Constitution. But it's us. The framers intended us to be the sentinels of liberty. We're not a democracy. We're not a place where your neighbor gets to vote and say, hey, Joe has a nice house, let's kill him and take it. We're not in a nation where the uninformed collective gets to say, well, we don't like your church, so it's illegal now, and you're going to jail. That's democracy. How's it sound? And so
two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner.
Exactly. And I prefer the two wolves and a very well-armed sheep deciding what's for dinner. That's a republic. And that's what we have. That's what we upheld in Olympia. We are facing a government that has declared war on liberty. They've declared war on rural America. They've declared war on peace and safety and security. But they don't make the laws. We, the people, make the laws. And people say, well, they'll do whatever they want. Yeah, they do, until we stop them, until we call them out, until we stand up to them. And if we all start sticking our necks out and standing up a little bit, if we all start doing something instead of just waving colored signs in front of the Capitol. And this was the key difference in why the rally in Olympia a few weeks ago caught so much national attention, because we made it very clear this is not a protest. We are coming together to boldly defy this piece of lawless legislation that you are implementing. We will do it standing on our feet. We will do it right in front of you, and you will not touch us. And we're not asking, we're not negotiating, because we do not need your permission to stand up for liberty.
Now, Gavin, for some of our listeners that may not know what you're talking about, can you give us a little bit of background on that piece of legislation?
Yeah, essentially, Washington was a test bed this year. And don't think it's just about Washington, because they quite literally are coming for your state next. What they passed here in Washington is known as Initiative 594. But long story short, it's a very complicated 18-page piece of legislation that is convoluted and messy and designed to be abused however they want. But the bottom line is, Jim, you come over here and I give you my side-by-side. I say, hey, let's go duck hunting, and we go out and you try it and you hand it back to me. Under this law, we're both felons for transferring the gun back and forth.
Wow.
It was sold as a background check law, and for the record, background checks, just like concealed weapons permits, just like any other gun restriction, are completely unconstitutional. But they sold it on the people. In Washington, the west side of the state is pretty liberal. The east side of the state is more in the middle to conservative. But the populous center is over there in Seattle and that area over there. So it tends to carry the vote. This was not promoted from within the state. It was promoted from without of the state by organizations like Moms Demand Action, Michael Bloomberg, and they spent millions upon millions upon millions of dollars to foist this on the people under the ruse of it's a background check. What it really is a step to making us all felons and to gun confiscation. That's exactly where it's going, and they have a clear plan that they're working on to go to your states next and implement this same thing. What I did with that is, a lot of us, of course, were opposing it. About a month before the general election in November, I put out a video and I said, listen, here's this bill that's going down and you shouldn't vote on it, and here's why. But then I took it further and I said, but this is the side of the conversation we're not taking on. If this passes, we must defy it immediately, and I will not comply with it. And so I started that message, and then ultimately what happened is the day it passed, I said, okay, I have to act now. Once I realized, much to people's chagrin and some of our surprise, that this was going to pass, I went out and started an event and said, we're going for this. And I did that before the election results were even called yet, and started an event saying, we're not going to protest, we're going to defy this. And the reason I did that is because there's a lot of political groups and gun groups, and I wasn't doing anything where I was waiting for a board to give approval or to say this or that. Because what the political groups tend to do in America is they tend to play the game. Well, let's just be nice and go shake hands with the legislators and ask them for our rights. So we made a very clear stand with the I Will Not Comply rally that we're not asking, we're demanding, we will violate this, and it's not a negotiation, and we won't so much as get the required permit to have this rally, and we did not. We refused to even get a permit from the state to gather, which is something that they require, and we put 2,000 to 3,000 people armed on the ground, standing up for liberty, and that day ended without so much as a piece of litter on the ground. So, I mean, what a stark contrast to the riots and things that we saw going on around the country. And to me, the key with that is we put liberty and principle first, but we also said we're going to be bold with liberty. We're not going to play games.
Well, Gavin, I think we've really seen kind of a changing of the dichotomy almost that this before, when we would be practicing our First Amendment rights to freedom of speech, that we would oftentimes see those people getting jackbooted right in front of the cameras. You know, we've got the kids in Occupy, you know, that are arm in arm, just getting sprayed by that officer. And that's just so commonplace. But this kind of last year, we've started seeing, starting with Bundy Ranch, really, where you use the Second Amendment to support the First Amendment, and things go much better for those people that are out there protesting.
Well,
And
exactly.
I think it's going to start a whole new paradigm, that this is kind of the future, and things are going to go better because of it. And, you know, not a single bullet flew at Bundy Ranch.
Well, and you raise an interesting point, and here's another side of that worth looking at. Number one, you know, we saw the chaos of of the Ferguson protests and things like that. And it was actually the statists dividing both ends against each other. On the one hand, you have the people that don't really know what they're protesting for, and they don't really know the principle of it, and a few of them are going off the rails and doing things that are against liberty. You don't promote liberty by violating someone else's liberty. So obviously, looting is appalling. On the other hand, there were a lot of people, like we saw in LA, and I was watching live streams as that went down, and I watched like 200 people get arrested for nothing, just because the statists did not want them there, and they were peacefully protesting on a corner. There was nothing untoward going on, and these people came and violated their oath. But on the other hand, because the media portrayed these guys as, well, here's the looters and Ferguson, the more fundamental conservative constitutionalists said, well, those people are nuts. Just lock them all up. So everybody kind of got off the rails a little bit. And I don't mean everybody. I mean, a lot of people got distracted from the real message of holding government accountable. But it's also a reminder that when we hold government accountable, we have to do so with principle and liberty. We need to control the conversation. And in close to that, one of the differences we're seeing is the patriots being willing to stand. You're still seeing people getting abused that stand in protests down in Los Angeles or something like that. You won't find very often a situation of people getting abused when the protesters are armed. And it's a whole different paradigm when people stand out there with force of arms. I was on the ground at the Bundy Ranch that Saturday last spring. I saw it. And
we were there too, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I probably met you guys down there. But it was amazing. And I have to say, we didn't win because our arms were better. In my opinion, we won it by the grace of God, because had it turned to a firefight, the Patriots would have been hosed. It probably also would have started the next American Revolution, and we almost saw that happen that day. But people stood the line, and they said, we're not willing to back down and give up our children's liberty.
Well, what's interesting about that whole situation was, originally they started out protesting without weapons. I mean, there are videos still out there. Right. The day they brought the dogs out, you had the Bundy family saying, look, we left our weapons at home. We're here peaceably. And then they got the dogs stuck on them. And now they decided to change the game up. And boy, it sure did.
Well, and what we need to remember is people will say, you're not peaceful, you're being aggressive, whatever. Having a weapon has nothing to do with whether you're peaceful. And we made it very clear in Olympia, and I make this very clear all the time. Number one, bloody revolution is the last resort of good men. If it comes to that, I want to do everything I can to stop it, because I don't want my children and grandchildren to have to spill their blood to take back liberty. It's my job, and it's your job to do whatever we can now. I can still stick my neck out without getting it chopped off. So until I can no longer do that, that is our duty. I see keyboard warriors and Facebook and all this stuff, and it's good to get the messages out there, don't get me wrong. But we have to start being willing to stand up and stand the line and actually do something, stand on principle, and get out there and go for it, and stand boldly before government and go on the offensive. And this is key. You mentioned when we started the show about getting lucky with the cops, and I don't know what word you want to apply to it, but what I do know, and I analyze all these things. I have a technique in activism and in taking stands. I see, here's my Constitution, here's principle, this is what's right. And I grab my banner and I go charging off the cliff. And on the way down, I make a plan before I smack into the bottom. That's my approach. But don't think by that I don't analyze and really try and organize as much as possible and plan things through. At the rally in Olympia, we had a great team of patriots working on this. We had the Bosworths, we had Kit Lang, we had people coming together, and it was a small team, but we had the ducks in a row and we had things organized, and we had a plan. But going on the offensive and taking it to them totally changes the game. And this is something I'm talking about a lot lately because I'm working on a book that I'm writing about activism, but I've really been microanalyzing what works and what doesn't. The bottom line is when you go on the offense against government, against an aggressive police officer, whatever, you have to be careful. I mean, there's a risk to doing this, but when you go on the offense and you stand up to them, everything changes. And when I say I'll go on the offense, I don't mean, you go take a poke at them to get them going. I mean, let me make an example. I get calls from people a lot of times, and they'll say, well, I'm dealing with a problem with the police, and they're following me, and they're intimidating me, and they're harassing me. They show up at my door late at night, And it's a technique. 95% of the justice system is intimidation. 5%, maybe less, is law. And I'm seeing this firsthand in the court system, in the way the process works. Everybody's terrified to stand up to them. But, for example, in my area, police won't follow me because I won't allow them to follow me. If an officer comes behind me and is following me, I immediately pull over, I make them pass, and then I pull out and I follow them. So it's not that I'm doing anything wrong. It's not necessarily that they're even there to harass me, but we all been in that position where the police officer pulls out behind you and you just kind of are watching the rear view mirror. When I pass a police officer in my county, they check their rear view mirror for my brake lights. And that's how it should be, because I put them in the position not of I hate you or I disrespect you, but I will hold you accountable and you are my servant. And everything changes when you treat your employee as an employee and yourself as the boss.
That's brilliant. Talk, if you can, a little bit about, you remember here, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, right in your own backyard, where the reporter went up to the guy with the giant vehicle and said, hey, that's pretty nice for Iraq, but what in the world do you need that around here for?
Right.
And he says, it's these constitutionalists and all their weapons. And, and my thought was, for crying out loud, fella, if you took an oath to the Constitution, aren't you really a constitutionalist as well? Respond to that if you could, Gavin. And what do you have in mind for that? I know you just didn't let that go by, I'm sure, right there in your own state. What'd you do about that? Or what do you have planned for that, I should say, anyway?
Well, there was a big rally the week after that up in Spokane. So that was the week after the I Will Not Comply rally. There was actually a follow-up rally organized by another group, but in the same spirit as the I Will Not Comply rally in Spokane. And then following that rally on the same day, there was a rally against the militarization of police. So I was actually up there that day, along with a lot of other patriots from around the state. A lot of us drove up there. Some of our state representatives have actually been involved. We have some Liberty representatives that are really great here in Washington State. So at the rally against that MRAP and in general, the militarization of police, I spoke up there. Representative Matt Shea spoke up there. And I basically challenged them to say, listen, if this guy will not respect the people, you throw him out of office. You recall him, you get him reelected, you do whatever it takes. Stop tolerating this sort of disrespect. And it was interesting because just a month or so before, Anthony Bosworth and I had gone up to Spokane regarding the unmarked car issue because Washington has a severe problem with this in general, but Spokane, they have more unmarked cars than marked cars. I mean, it's completely rampant up there, and the sheriff makes the excuse of, well, that's not what the law says, even though that's what it says. So we actually went up there and we basically ran anywhere we wanted on the whole sheriff, police station, courthouse complex all afternoon. And by the end of the day, we would walk up to police officers and they would floor it and run away. Because we were up there challenging them. We were challenging the authority of what they were doing. We were putting it on video. So we actually released a video that week from Spokane. I have a message of, first of all, don't get distracted by the rabbit trails. Take on individual issues as they come up. Take them on firmly and boldly. And remember that it's not about unmarked cars. It's not about guns. It's not about militarized police. It's about liberty. It all falls under that, and we have to take it all on. So let's focus on that. The other thing I try and do is, while I do go up to places like Spokane, I mean, I was up there twice for this incident, a lot of what I do and the reason that I do my videos the way that I do and that I'm talking and saying, hey, here's what's going on, here's why, not only does it keep me focused, but it educates people, because I get messages from people all the time saying, hey, Gavin, come over to our city and help us. And I'm like, no, you guys need to step up and you need to start standing in your city, in your county, in your community. I support that, but activists can't be everywhere at once. We all need to be activists in some form.
Gavin, when you see all of MTV videos, music videos, rap music, all different kinds of things culturally that are being used to really influence our youth. I'm of the mindset that that's really where the battleground is, with their youth. And I'm saying under 25s, maybe under 30s, guys like yourself. Do you see that as being really the main area that we need to focus on? I mean, even the high school level kids, or what's your target audience?
My target audience, quite frankly, is anybody that will listen, although I would say there is a lot of people in my age group that are recognizing and frustrated. A lot of times I deal with people in the older generation, and I guess they're tired. They don't want to deal with it. And I'm like, no, you got to step up. You failed us by allowing this to get to this point, and you need to step up. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of the elders in like my dad's generation, my grandpa's generation, that are standing up and that do care. But there's also a lot of people, as we see in our elections every year, that are more concerned about, what their Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security is doing than what Liberty's doing. And that's unfortunate. But the bottom line is, yes, I agree with you. Ultimately, if you want to look at the condition of our country, the complete apathy and laziness of the people, ultimately this goes down to the family, the way we raise our kids, to the church, to our morals, to our values. That's where this starts. It starts when they're, just 6 years old, like my son, and they're looking and they're saying, "What's going on here, Dad? Why is this happening?" And people will get mad at me because I'll be on road trips and take on activism sometimes, and the kids will be in the back seat and they'll say, "Well, that's terrible." And I say, "Listen, I'm not going to give up liberty in front of my kids because they're with me. We're a family, and we're going to go out and we're going to stand up for what's right." And they understand way more than people realize. They'll sit in the back seat and he'll ask questions about what's happening if we're at a checkpoint, that sort of thing. So they're very aware. And I have to say, I was homeschooled. My kids are homeschooled. Our government institutions, you look at things like Common Core, you look at what's happening with the schools. If there's one thing you do for liberty right now, get your kids out of the government brainwashing system. Anything but that, because their goal right now is to make the next generation complete statists. And let's not kid ourselves. We can see this in what's coming out of things like Common Core. And so I know this is a hard thing to take on, but I'm just like, let's find a way. Let's find a way to make sure that our children aren't being polluted by the very government that opposes everything we stand for.
Well, let me ask you this, Gavin. You talk about getting people motivated to get out there and do some action, but for some people that have never done any political activism before, it can be a big step to make that transition from getting up off the couch, turning off the Xbox, and getting out there and doing something. What advice would you give someone who maybe is ready to make that first step and get out there as to how they can do that?
It's interesting because I just had an interview yesterday with an organization that's looking at talking about solutions for this, and I write about it on my blog over at callmegav.com. But the reality is that there's no manual for this. And, you can go out and when I first started doing this, I went out and I said, well, do I have to answer questions at a border checkpoint? I'd start Googling for things, and I found a lot of vague responses, and I knew there were some people challenging things. But a lot of what I have done, and one of the reasons that a lot of my videos have taken off, is because I would go out and look for something, and I couldn't get an answer to it. So I would simply do it. There's one of a checkpoint in California, and I thought, gosh, I'm so tired of this from these people. And we always have this line where we say, am I being detained? Am I free to go? And we've all heard that before if we've watched activism videos. But I thought, wait a minute, why am I asking them if I'm free to go? So I started looking around. How can I just drive away from a checkpoint? Well, I didn't find any solid answers for that. So I drove up to the checkpoint in California, the Fruit Nazi checkpoint, as a lot of us like to call it. And they started questioning me, and I said, no, I'm not answering your questions. And they said, well, open up the back of your truck. And I said, no. And they said, well, you can't film me. And I said, yes, I can. And so they brought out somebody else, and we went around. And finally, I went around with the guy for a minute, and this is again with my RV and the kids in the back seat. And I said, am I being detained? And I forced that question on him, and he said, no. And I put it in drive, and I put the pedal to the metal, and I said, bye. And I took off down the road. And I didn't ask, because I don't need to ask for my rights. So what I'm getting at is sometimes we have to step out, and I'm trying to cover this. I blog about this. I'm working on a book about this that actually is a manual for what I've discovered in activism. But I think we all need to be talking very actively about what we do. The number one tip I have, to answer your question more specifically, number one is you never stand up without a camera. And I mean this very literally. I'm somebody that carries quite a bit. I'm a strong Second Amendment supporter, but I have a camera with me before I have my gun. That's the number one thing. I don't even go into the post office without my cell phone in my pocket, knowing that it's charged, knowing that I can do a video. Because if anything comes up, if ever I take something on, the camera goes on before I ever engage, because not only is that critical to the conversation, it's critical for your safety. Because when that camera is on them, the game changes. It's kind of like when you go on the offense and stand up to them. They can say you did whatever you want. I mean, I've been right in there inside their territory. I've been in talking with the chief of police before and had him bodily grab me and throw me from the police station. But it was all on camera because I refused to turn the camera off. And I would say number one rule is get it on camera. Number two, it's going to be intimidating, but just remember that know your rights, know the basics, and stand your ground. Whatever you do, have the camera and never turn it off, because that's what they'll try and do. They'll try and either tell you or give you the impression that you need to turn the camera off. I will never turn the camera off. You know, they could be beating me and the camera would not go off. So that's the number one thing. Never turn that camera off. Always hold them accountable so you can get that word out there. And number two, you don't have to start activism by going and pulling over your sheriff. You know, you can. A great way to start is just you see a police stop on the way home and you park across the street and you sit there and you film it. And a lot of times they're not even going to engage with you. Sometimes police are so hostile and aggressive that they might come engage with you anyhow. But if you want to feel a little safer, just stay in the car. Just park across the street. You know, I always lock the doors if a police officer is coming up to my vehicle. I never give them the opportunity to open my doors. If they want to get in my car without my permission, they will have to break the window, and then that will be on video. So I'm covering my bases throughout that whole process. And that's very empowering. And once you do that, get the conversation out. And remember, you're standing on principle. You don't owe them an explanation. You don't even have to talk to them. One thing that works really well, and it throws off their groove, they have the approach, and we all know this when we're dealing with government. You know, if you've been pulled over, the first approach of a lot of officers is they kind of get the boot on your neck. They try and intimidate you. They be forceful with the questions. I don't holler or shout or be rude to them, but I am equally forceful or more because I treat them as my employee. So if I get pulled over and a police officer comes up to my window, they'll say a license, registration, etc. And I'll say, hey, what are you stopping me for? And it's the tone of your voice even carries a lot. I don't get in a verbal altercation with them unless they push that. I just film them. I stand up for myself and make sure that I'm controlling the conversation. And if things are problematic, I will ignore them for a minute. I'll turn to the camera and I'll explain to the camera, to the viewer, what's happening and why I'm doing what I'm doing. And let me tell you what, they have no idea what to do with that. Because when you're standing there and you're talking about them as the third party and they're standing there watching, it helps you focus. It actually helps the activist relax a little bit. Wow. And helps them stay on track.
You know what this sounds like? It sounds like almost a Sun Tzu art of activism.
There is a formula for it, and it's not a complex one, and that's why I'm continually trying to write it down and study it. I mean, I microanalyze every video I do. I look, okay, is there anywhere that I was out of line? Is there anywhere that I wasn't standing on principle? How was the conversation controlled? And you see me keep saying this. When I did the rally a few weeks ago, a lot of the political groups, the gun groups and stuff got a hold of me because I had basically grabbed a hold of the conversation by the horns and was running with it. So they realized that, and they got a hold of me. And I said, look, you guys are welcome to work with us. But I didn't let them neuter the conversation. They said, well, let's calm it down. We want to make sure the media doesn't dislike us. And I said, no, you don't understand. I don't care what the news media thinks of me because they're not controlling this conversation, and I'm not relying on them. We're controlling this conversation. This is a huge mistake that the Patriots and the gun groups have made. And for the record, none of the gun groups stood with us in Olympia. They didn't want to do anything that daring. And that's a shame. And we're hoping they'll start stepping up now that we've set that example, and the Patriots set that example here in Washington for all of America. But we need to remember, let's take gun rights, for example, but it applies to all of our rights. We're debating the wrong way, America. Arguments for any gun restrictions are irrelevant because nothing that can be said will change our rights, ever. So we need to stop treating anti-peace statists as if they're people that deserve to be heard. They think they get to redefine law as they go along, and that's lawless and criminal, and we need to treat it with the disregard that it deserves.
I want a copy of that book as soon as you got something.
I'm hoping that I'm cranking away. I hope in the next, hopefully later this year, it'll be pulled together. I still got to work on the publishing process and stuff like that, but it is coming along.
As soon as you get an editable version, send it over.
I will
talking
get you
about
a review copy to take a look at and give some insight. Yeah, and basically what I'm doing is, after the rally, some people, Patriot leaders like Mike Vanderbo and stuff, came together and they said, look, this is what we just did here is a blueprint. We had people, speakers, supporters, patriots flying from all over the country to stand with us in Olympia. It was a rally like we've never seen before in America, quite frankly. And he said, this is a blueprint for how we can do this, and we need to put it out there. So I'm hoping that all team members will continue writing about it. I'm going to continue blogging about it. But with the project that I'm working on in writing the book, I'm basically, each time something comes up and something comes to my mind, I say, well, I recognize now that I'm in that mode. Oh, that's how that works. That's how I do that. That worked for him. So people will contact me and they'll say, how do I handle this? And I'll say, well, I'm no lawyer, but here's what I found works. And then I'll hear back from him. I just heard back from a guy yesterday that the courts had got a restraining order. Somebody got a restraining order against him. The sheriff came around. They were saying they wanted to take his guns. And I just said, look, I mean, if you haven't committed a crime, if you're not charged with a crime, if you haven't been convicted, they have no right to violate your rights. You need to stand up for yourself. You need to uphold the law. And lastly, you need to make the conversation public. You need to let people know what's going on so you put them on the spot. Now you're controlling the conversation. And I actually heard from him yesterday, and he said it worked. They dismissed it. And so I'm not saying that this is a magic formula that we will always stop government, but
it seems to be working.
It seems to be working, and I keep talking, when I say control the conversation, I mean you really control the conversation. If something happens, I will be posting about it and explaining what happened and sharing that story long before the news media will be spinning it their way. I don't wait for them. And everything I do in terms of activism, I don't do it under the radar. I don't do it hidden. It's for my own protection. Everything I do, people say, well, Gavin, you just want your 15 minutes of fame. That's not the issue. I got that a long time ago. The issue is that I want the conversation to spread, and it is for my safety as somebody standing up. The more people know, the more people see, the more evidence of my actions and my credibility is out there, the harder it is for them to bring me down. Because make no mistake, they would love to see me in prison, and they will try with somebody that's as active in it as me. And I'm not saying we all have to be this active of activists. We just all need to be activists to a degree.
Well, I think, too, once you actually take that step and move forward, at least from my own experience this year, we started off by going down to Bundy Ranch. After that, I went out to Jackson County, Kentucky to help Sheriff Denny Pyman with his re-election campaign, just helping him out in general.
Right.
And it seems like doors just open up. I don't know if it's providence or what it is, but if you're doing the right thing, doors seem to open for you.
Yeah, and it's a challenge for those of us that are actively standing because, while I do get some donations on my site and things like that, I mean, this isn't my day job. And quite frankly, my business has suffered because I spend so much time in Liberty. But you know what? So did the framers. So, as long as the food's still on the table and the message is getting out there, we're making a difference by standing up for Liberty. We've got to stop. Let me just say this. Stop supporting your local GOP party. Stop sending money to the Republicans or the Democrats or the Libertarians. Let's just include them all. The parties are destroying America. And George Washington warned us about the party way, way back. And I realized that party is a fact. And as a person running for office, I ran as a Republican, and I made it clear that I was a constitutional Republican. I'm a Republican on principle because I uphold the Constitution and our republic. But I made no bones about it. I said the party's not Republicans. The party is fakes. They're not promoting the republic. They're not upholding our Constitution. And I realize I'm making blanket statements. I mean, I know great people and patriots that work within the party. What I'm saying is I know people that expend a lot of energy to fix their party. And I think sadly we're past that. Take that energy. I was having a conversation and I said to somebody that's working within the party, I said, look, we're here and Liberty's there across yonder valley. And down in the middle in the gulch is party. And they're blocking the way. There's Liberty over there. We need to be the freight train. And we need to barrel right across through the valley, through the party, grab the shattered ruins that will help us along the way and get over there to Liberty. Then we'll worry about what to do with party. But the system is so corrupt. And by this, I don't mean elect good representatives. I mean, stop worrying about the clubs and the games and start standing up. Start looking for people who are true fighters, not slippery politicians that say, yeah, I'm going to do more when I get there. Let's look for evidence of what they've actually done. Are they standing the line with us? Were they with us at the Bundy Ranch? Those are the kind of people that I want to see be our sheriffs and our congressmen and our state legislators. And some of them were down there with us at the Bundy Ranch, which was a turning point for America. The conversation is of liberty. That's the foundation. Liberty is not the fringe. Liberty is the foundation. And we start with a revolution of hearts, and with that must come a resolve to do what we must to preserve liberty.
You know, Gavin, you remind me a lot of, you're probably familiar with James O'Keefe. And I say that, I mean that in an innovative way, the guy from Project Veritas. You're sort of doing things that no one else has done before, and you're getting great results. Who, if you could, in that vein, who has been some of your inspirations? Who have you, it doesn't sound like you need many. It sounds like you're a pretty self-inspired guy, and I say that in a very politest sense. But who did you look to, or who was your inspirations, if any, when you were getting involved in this?
You know, I think early on, I mean, in the initial sense, I got a lot of inspiration because I first started taking on checkpoints. So there's some fixtures of people that would challenge the checkpoints in Arizona. There was the Baptist minister, I forget his name, but he was one of the early guys to take on a checkpoint, and he got beat up for it. And I should remember his name, but I just can't right now. So a lot of people, I just recognized people were standing up. In the larger sense, I guess my inspiration is, as a Christian, is Christ. I'm standing up for liberty. And that's my foundation, is that this is what's right, and I'm going to stand up for what's right. And Jesus wasn't a hippie and a pacifist. He was somebody that stood up for what was right. But I also look to a lot of people. When I first started running for Congress, I was looking at people that stand up. And I started looking at people that were legislators and that were politicians, because we all say, well, we hate politicians. And I started to stop boxing them in. We have almost exclusively bad politicians, but it's because we keep sending those ones there instead of the ones that are willing to stand the line with us and willing to put themselves on the line. So, you know, I started watching the things that people like Ted Cruz would do with the conversation. And whether you like him or not, I would look at what people like that were doing and how they would do a filibuster on the floor and they would turn the whole country upside down. And I said, you know, there's a key. You know, in Washington State, we have representatives like Matt Shea, Dave Taylor, Jason Overstreet, Elizabeth Scott. There's some liberty representatives that are standing up and standing the line for us. And even though they're outnumbered, they're getting a lot done. And I started looking at that and thinking, okay, well, as a representative, I'm going to run for Congress. What can I do? Because I'll just be one more seat. Even if I win, I'll just be one more seat in Congress, and that'll be a constitutional vote, and that's good. But I knew from talking to people that were on the inside that Congress is too far polluted that you're going to go in there and fix it. I mean, it's pretty much has to come unglued. So I said, that's not the key. I will vote constitutional, but I will turn Washington, D.C. and America on its ear by actually standing up. And we're not seeing this from most of our representatives. They're not actually standing up. They're doing things here and there that make people happy. But you show me a congressman that walks down Constitution Avenue with a .45 on his hip. You show me a congressman that goes through a TSA checkpoint and says, how dare you try to prevent the American people from traveling, and walks on through and makes them tackle him. That's representation. I want to see representatives that, like the people, are standing up. Because who better to represent us? Who better to be an activist than the people that we're electing to represent us? And to me, that's all I'm doing when I stand up. I didn't get elected, but I'm still representing, and you should be representing, and my neighbors should be representing. We should be representing liberty for our children and our grandchildren and for our posterity. And to the cowards and haters of liberty, let your names fade into the light. Let our posterity never say these were men to emulate. Let the just know that your approval is not needed, and that your willingness to be trampled defines insanity for those with the courage to stand principled for liberty. Now you got me all fired up.
That's awesome.
Yeah, man.
You got me fired up just listening to you, man. Great. We need this. We really, really need this. And we need this getting fired up. It's contagious, man. It really is.
We need passion, and the problem is we're not getting passion from the people who are supposed to be our leaders. And don't get me wrong, we do have some congressmen and some representatives that stand up and are passionate, but there's so little passion, and people don't know where to look. They don't really know where to get answers. I mean, for heaven's sake, we have an injustice system in America that its main goal is to keep the jackboot of tyranny on the necks of people. And I'm not saying that I'm against a justice system, that I'm against due process. There has to be justice. But it's not justice when we have police out there arresting people for things that are their rights. Let's say for carrying a weapon without a permit. We have them arresting them for that, and we have a court system that's prosecuting them and pushing them and ruining their lives because they exercise an absolute and fundamental right that those very people who are assaulting their liberty swore to uphold. And I see this. I've sat in a courtroom recently. I've watched the system abuse people and recognize it's all about the thumb on the pulse. It's all about them having the boot on our neck. And I know there's some exceptions to this, but I wrote an article recently about, hey, are most cops really good? Because we've been bullied in America to say, well, most police are good. And that's the truth. We have bad stuff happening from our police all over America. But those are the exceptions, people say. Those are only what you hear about, is the police that shot that guy in the back. Okay, that's true. And I don't assert that all police are murderers. And I don't hate police or government. I hate injustice. But I look to a police officer, let's say. And this really, I'm not just picking on police officers. This falls to all of America and all our elected representatives. But let's take the question of a good police officer. Ask yourself, if tyranny becomes common, is it safe to say that the defenders of liberty are doing a good job? And so the bottom line for me is that you're not a good cop because you don't violate my rights. You're a bad cop if you don't protect them with your life. That's the only major that counts. And if you can't handle that, I don't hate you. You just need to find a new job because you're not doing the job that you were hired to do. And then they say to me, Gavin, you need to ride with an officer for a day and see what they deal with. And I respond, the officer needs to ride with me for a day and see what liberty is dealing with. Okay, I'm going here. Go ahead. Sorry.
No problem. I hear you, and I do know officers. I think they're great guys, but
right.
Most of the officers I'm looking up to are members of the Constitutional Sheriff and Peace Officers Association.
Exactly.
So I kind of surround myself with the good guys. So
right.
Anyway, we're coming up to the end of the show. We got about a minute left. I want to make sure you've got a chance to give out your websites and whatnot. And please let us know where we can get more information, where our listeners can see your videos and anything else you want to wrap with.
Yeah, quickest way you can find me, I'll just make it simple, is my website, callmegav.com, CALLMEGAV.com. And from there, you can find my newsletter, my Twitter, my YouTube channel, my Facebook, all that kind of stuff is right there visible from the page. So just go over to there and just keep it up. We can all be activists. We can all stand. Liberty's not the fringe. Liberty's the foundation. Start taking it back. Because when government fears the people, there is liberty. And as we're doing that, let's support and have great respect for our representatives and our police officers and those that are really upholding their oath. But let's hold them to that high standard. Let's get out that Constitution and say, well, wait a minute, are you actually upholding this? At the rally in Olympia, I burned my concealed weapons permit. We signed, over 700 of us signed the Declaration of Affirmation, and we said we are done having our liberties trampled by you, and we will stand up for it. We have to stand up, America. This is our job. This is our duty, and this is our time. If we do not stand up now, our children and grandchildren will have to take back liberty at the price of blood.
All right, folks. Well, that's the show. We'll be back tomorrow.
Incredible interview, Gavin. Thank you.
Same bat time, same bat channel. Talk to you then, folks.